You've landed at Spark Launch, the guide star for embracing what it means to be neurodiverse. I'm Mike Cornell, joined by CEO of Spark Launch, Chaya. Here, we navigate mental health triumphs and tribulations from all across the spectrum, charting a course through the shared experiences that unite us, and discovering how to embody the unique strengths within neurodivergent and neurotypical alike, igniting your spark and launching it into a better tomorrow. Hello there. I'm Mike.
I'm Chaya.
And today we want to welcome onto the show Michelle Markman, a late diagnosed autistic entrepreneur, wife, and mother. She's the founder of ND Coach Inc., where she serves as a neurodivergent coach, empowering high-achieving women who are late to diagnosed or self-diagnosed neurodivergent. And Michelle's journey of self-discovery began in her early 30s, which led her to embrace her strengths and challenges associated with autism. She's passionate about helping neurodivergent individuals unmask and live a life that reflects their true essence. Welcome onto the show, Michelle.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Michelle, late diagnosis means that you went through being a neurodivergent without knowing that you were neurodivergent. So how did life look like? And what did you wish you knew back then?
I think especially growing up, I always felt like I was different. I just didn't know what it was that made me different. And in childhood, my brother was actually diagnosed with autism and ADHD when he was 4. So I really grew up thinking I was a neurotypical sibling, but still didn't fit into society the way that other people did. I just didn't make friends the same way, didn't connect with other people. I always felt like there was something different about myself. I almost felt like I was an alien. And I've heard a lot of people say that. It's kind of a common sentiment within the late diagnosed community, because you are similar to other people, but you're not the same. There's something that kind of makes things different about you and the way that you relate to other people.
I mean, I feel the same. Always struggled with connecting and actually fitting in, right? Just seeing how other people were doing, especially in school. I think my elementary and middle school the most. High school was different because I found my tribe. But my tribe, now we keep talking, I think my tribe they're all neurodivergent, right? So fitting in, when you try to fit in, right, you realize you're different, because that forcing yourself to be somebody who you're not is when you realize you're different. So can you maybe share some stories or your experiences? How did you feel you were different, or how it looked from your angle, from your experience?
Yeah. So I think growing up, even from kindergarten, I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before the show, but preschool I loved. I got along with everyone in preschool. Preschool was fantastic. It was my favorite thing. I loved going to school. And then I went to kindergarten, and the expectations changed. All of a sudden, I was supposed to sit in my seat and raise my hand when I had a question and ask for permission if I had to go to the bathroom. And I think the structure was really kind of suffocating for me as a neurodivergent child. I wanted to be able to move and process my environment by moving about it freely. And my classmates noticed that I was not as good at following directions as they were. I think maybe the delayed processing also was noticeable. I do definitely process things more slowly than other people. And what's interesting about that is autistic people actually process way more information than neurotypical people. I believe people with ADHD also do. So it's that we're processing more information. It's not that we're processing slower, but that results in delayed processing. So, if a teacher would say, you need to sit in your seat, it might take me a while to get back there because I'm busy doing something else, or I could be hyper-focused or something like that. And then beyond school, I ended up being homeschooled for a good portion of my education, and even connecting with other kids in homeschool groups, there was just always some kind of a separation. I loved people. I've always loved people. I'm such a people person, always have been. People have not always reciprocated that to me. So I would try to connect with other people and make friends and just, try to cultivate relationships. And I would just get so much pushback, or, be told I was weird, or kids wouldn't want to interact with me. So it was really a big learning curve on how to mask enough to be accepted. And then that whole, after getting my diagnosis, realizing how much masking I was doing, and then starting to kind of come back from that and realize, I don't have to constantly be masking. I don't have to always show up in a way that makes other people comfortable. I can show up in a way that works for me. And that was like, wow. So that's been a journey.
And when you look at masking, right, we just don't mask out of the blue. It's because of those rules that are set for us, especially as a child. In school, you have to come back to your desk on time. You have to finish things a certain way, or you have to do something within a time frame, right? For instance, you were talking about how we take longer to process, and it's not that it's slower. I know being an ADHD and possibly an autistic person, I process a lot of information. So it's not that we are slow, like the whole world puts it, but we're processing a lot, and you're sorting that while you're processing and figuring out what's important to me, what's important to other people. So there's a lot that's going on in our head. But then you are always compared to the standards that are being set, and we realize we're not meeting those standards, and as a result we learn to mask, also tell ourselves we're not good enough. A lot of things happen because of that. So the masking is, nobody wants to mask, right? It's something that we learn. It's a learned thing. And I'm so glad you found you were diagnosed way earlier than I realized, and you came out of it. So talk to us about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I got my diagnosis at 27. I was in college at the time, having grown up the neurotypical sibling of an ADHDer, which is someone who has both autism and ADHD. It was a shock. I was completely blindsided by my diagnosis. I only knew the stereotypical presentations of autism and ADHD. I didn't know that it was really a spectrum, which is what it is, and which is what is part of my advocacy work, is teaching other people that, neurodiversity is a spectrum and you can show up anywhere along that spectrum. And a lot of the time, someone can appear very sort of neurotypical and still be neurodivergent. So I was shocked. I got this diagnosis. I thought, no, that's wrong, but fine, whatever. I need my extra time on tests. I need my quiet testing space because I get distracted when other people are clicking pens and, chewing gum and shaking their leg during a test. That would drive me nuts. Neurotypical's not going to notice that. But so I really denied the diagnosis for about 3 years. And it wasn't until I'd been married for probably a year, and I was thinking about how my other friends who were married really were happier in their marriages and weren't struggling as much as I was with the new responsibilities of being a full-time employee and now also being a wife. And so that's when I kind of dug out my diagnostic paperwork and I went through it and I started learning about autism and I started joining Facebook groups and I started connecting with other people. And there was a period of time where I joined a bunch of different Facebook groups and then I got kicked out of them because I wasn't autistic enough to fit into those Facebook groups. And so they kicked me out. And also I had a lot of internalized ableism, which I'm still working on today. I think that may be a lifetime process, unpacking the ableism, unpacking the masking. And it's something I really do work on every day. But I really didn't identify with other autistic people. So it was a whole process of finding my neuro tribe within the neurodivergent community, finding those people that I resonated with that had similar experiences and similar backgrounds. And then once I finally acknowledged the diagnosis and I started learning about it and I started accommodating my needs, it was really life-changing. And that's also why I started my coaching company, Indie Coach Inc., because I wanted to provide accommodations and services and coaching for other women who are neurodivergent. And there's such little support out there for adults. I mean, all the support that I use, I pay for out of pocket, and it's not neurodivergent support. So I think it's really important that we have supports available and that we know that they're out there.
Something you said earlier has really stuck with me is, being a people person and people in turn not really giving that back to you. That is like such a it's a common experience with any neurodivergent, but especially for the late diagnosers, such as ourselves, who went through so much of our lives being out of frequency with other people, is how I always refer to it. So when it came to finding your diagnosis, realizing this about yourself, what was the social and personal change with relationships with other people or interacting with other people? And especially when you're finding like these communities and are able to finally like connect to somebody who thinks the same way you think. What was kind of like the before and after image of that?
I was able to acknowledge that I communicate differently, that neurodivergent people communicate differently, and neurotypical people communicate in one way, neurodivergent people communicate in another way. And I do tend to find that, especially with ADHDers, autistics, we tend to kind of communicate in a very similar way. So I did move towards connecting more with neurodivergent individuals once I learned about my diagnosis. And I just found that we were better at communicating with each other, better at understanding each other. I do still have a number of neurotypical friends, and I have a number of friends who identify as neurotypical. Whether or not they are, we will we will or will not find out, and I'm not going to burst their bubble. But I think I started to really sort of gravitate towards my neurotribe. I don't know if you've heard of the book Neurotribes, but there is a really interesting book about how we all have different neurotypes, and within those neurotypes, there's different forms of communication and connection. And so, yeah, post-diagnosis, I think I really have tended to gravitate more towards other neurodivergent individuals. But I do, I definitely interact a lot with neurotypicals. I have neurotypical friends. I work in an organization that's primarily neurotypical. So it's kind of, I kind of bridge the gap between those two worlds.
So you talked about communication. What have you seen? What's the difference from your eyes, what a neurotypical communication looks like and what a neurodivergent communication looks like?
Well, I think the big differences that I see are that in neurotypical communication, people tend to speak more in questions. They ask each other questions. And neurodivergent people tend to speak more in statements or diatribes or monologues. And if someone asks us a question, we'll respond, but we may not necessarily automatically ask a question back. It's just not really how we communicate. So that's a little bit different. And then I think some of the body language is different depending. And, there's two types of neurodivergent people. There's the kind that won't make eye contact with you. And then there's the kind that like stares deeply into your soul. And I'm the latter because I really personally, I heard, make eye contact and I took it literally. So people have always found me intimidating because I stare into their eyeballs. And this is something that I've been working on recently because there's just like, also that brings us to, communication and how literal it is. Autistic neurodivergent people tend to take things more literally. And I absolutely understand sarcasm and joking and all that stuff. But there are certain aspects of things that I really did take and do take literally. And it's just, we're a little bit more literal when it comes to things. And we tend to say what we mean and mean what we say versus a neurotypical person will kind of allude to something. And I've learned to do a lot of alluding. And I think that's part of what's made me very successful in business. But yeah, there's certainly some differences in communication.
The literal thing is always very funny to me because, as you said, like there's plenty like sarcasm stuff, all that like I get. But if you come at me just like casually say something that's meant to be sarcastic, not even sarcastic, but metaphorical in some way or rhetorical, I'll just immediately like my brain will just spurt out an answer and it confuse everybody in the room. It's like, well, why did you just answer that? Like, oh, I wasn't supposed to. Okay, okay. I'm gonna go sit in the corner now if anybody needs me. And it's like, to me, it's more funny than anything else. When I was growing up, it was frustrating because I was always afraid if I answered, it would be the wrong time to answer. And then I've always been like naturally sarcastic. I built it in as a defense mechanism early on and it's just never gone anywhere. But it was like a combination. There's a special kind of sarcastic that autistics have where it's so dry that we're then immediately told for being an asshole, which, is part of the fun in some instances. But it also, it creates a lot of like, I think, internalization as well. Like, well, am I a jerk? Am I, because of the way that I'm like not understanding what anybody else is saying, and then I'm doing the thing that I think everybody else is doing. It's a lot of confused like personality points that sort of get stuck in there. And I really like what you said, and it's too true that neurodivergents don't naturally ask a lot of questions. We speak in thought-provoking statements that I always kind of end with an ellipses, like, and then you, person I'm talking to, shall pick up from where I'm speaking, and then no one else seems to really get it most of the time, unless you're talking to another neurodivergent, and that's how like the really deep conversations happen. And that goes back to Neurotribes, which you mentioned, which is such an amazing book for anybody to pick up and read to really understand neurodivergence. But that gets into like what double empathy is and why we have an easier time communicating with each other versus with a neurotypical who will go back and forth, who does questions and then empty statements. I can't do empty statements. I can't do this, just like the whole idea of asking, hey, how are you doing? And that's not supposed to be answered, which always confuses me. I will never understand like how that's a question. Like why you say something that ends with question mark, but there is no response to it. You just say hello back. That doesn't make any sense to me. So then when we interact with a fellow neurodivergent, we say, hey, how are you? And then we hear about that person's entire day because that's what we kind of actually want. And it's an unfortunate, it's an unfortunate breakdown, but why exactly community for neurodivergence is so important? It's not like we want to corral ourselves and not interact with autistics or anything like that, which I think sometimes people ironically take it too literally and think that's like we can only interact with neurodivergence, but it's where we can be more comfortable and be a little bit more mask off, and also our weird idiosyncrasies that come up as part of our personality, they're more widely accepted. Or if we do something that's odd, I find if we do it in front of another neurodivergent, they tend to respond more in, you did that kind of weird. Why is that? Instead of like, you did that weird. Goodbye now, which I think it tends to be the common response, at least that I've gotten since I was a kid.
Not that they would tell you first, though.
That is true.
You.
They would just the ghost you, and then you probably hear about like, hey, did you hear what so-and-so was saying about you behind your back? Why work environments are like so much fun for us. But that is why I like fostering like those communities, because it also builds up social resilience. And it always is odd to speak of like building social skills when you're an adult, like I'm still working on social skills at the age of 36. And I'm not really ashamed to say that. Like I'm still working on figuring stuff out for like between so long of masking and then so long of just never gave myself a chance to begin to understand how I personally communicate, which I then, kind of maybe reflect back on who I'm talking to, and it becomes a lot of miscommunication. So what you're doing, like with wanting to create like groups and communities, can really go far in helping just the overall sphere of neurodivergence out in the world, where we are often very separated and silenced and almost treated like it's wrong for us to actually interact with one.
Yeah. And I really think, I think that there is a stigma out there that neurodivergent people don't want the relationships that neurotypical people want. And it's wrong. So I think that everybody needs to know we want to connect. We want relationships. We want friendships. We want intimate romantic partners. We want acquaintances. We want all of it. And I would say, of course, I can't speak for everyone. Maybe some people don't. But I think at the core of our being, the little children inside of us have always wanted to connect with other people. We just didn't know how to do that in a way that we would be accepted. And so, as we were saying earlier, Chaya, we really have learned how to mask. And masking was the only way that we could connect with others and to really feel a sense of belonging, because we really do. We all need people. And I think that's something that everybody needs to understand. So as you were saying, Mike, it's really important that we have these communities, we have opportunities to connect with other people who have similarities, who've been through similar experiences, who have, similar neurotypes, so that we have that sense of community and connection and belonging, because it's part of the human experience. And it's something that we all really do need, regardless of what our neurotype is. And that's part of why I have a Facebook community and I have a LinkedIn community. And I just want people to be able to connect with each other and to feel supported and not to have to feel so alone or so othered, so different.
You talked about unmasking and you practice that every day. So what does that look like?
I think for me, it's really challenging. I have spent so much of my life learning how to appear neurotypical. So separating out what is masking versus what is being me has been a big challenge. And it's something that I continue to work on every day. There is a thing with neurodivergent people where we realize that we're being perceived. And so being perceived makes us sort of want to appear in a certain way. So I try to kind of spend more time by myself and practice, just behaving how I would if I was by myself. I do still find myself masking quite frequently. And honestly, in business, it's something that I feel like I have to do. So it's definitely a process, but I try to be a little bit more authentic every day, a little bit more myself, and do that in a way that really just brings out who I am.
Yeah, it is a process, right? Because I really don't know who Chaya is. I'm still trying to figure that out, right? But I've learned one thing that I've learned is to let go of that expectation of what somebody else is going to do based on how I portray myself. As long as I know in my consciousness that I'm doing the right thing, my intentions are clear and has good purpose, it has a good direction, and I put the right energy, I'm going to let go of what somebody else is going to think of me. Because, yeah, people are going to fall off. They might think, who's this person? This is not who I knew. And then there are a lot of people who stay because they are proud or they always knew who I was, right? So I think if we just constantly embrace ourselves, our authentic selves, and just let go of what's going to happen, even our clients, whatever that may be, let them all fall off, because the true people will always be there, and you might find a new tribe. That's what happened to me. I let go of the expectation and I just started embracing my authenticity, and I found this whole new community which I would never have. Right. So but it's not easy because of all those rules, and especially we are so different, we are out of box, right? Very weird, and whatever that may be. What is weird, right? I don't even know that. Like, so different. Yeah, if you just let go, I think we'll elevate and become pure and make purer connections who will accept us for who we are. So share for your community and your coaching, what do you see and how do you serve, and what are some of the growth you've seen, and why do you feel it's so important to do what you're doing?
Yeah, so, I think it's really important because there's just not a lot of accommodations or supports available for neurodivergent people, especially those of us who are late realized or late diagnosed. I don't particularly know of too many, and those of us who are low support needs, or as the neurotypicals would say, high functioning, we don't say low support needs, they really don't exist. So I accommodate myself in a lot of ways. I use Instacart for shopping. I use AirPods all the time for noise cancellation. I recommend that my clients do things like this as well. But there's no services out there for me as a low support needs individual. So I wanted to create a company that really catered to high achieving, high masking, neurodivergent women. And specifically, I'm working with executives, directors, women who are dealing with being in a very high level leadership position in business, in corporate, but then they're struggling with burnout and being overwhelmed and, delegating in their personal and professional lives, because something that we tend to do is take on all the responsibilities and not realize that we can set boundaries and say no to projects and no to responsibilities. So that's a lot of my work, really helping people develop strategies to cope with their challenges, and then working on self-advocacy, implementing new self-care practices, learning how to ground themselves in a way that really works for them, and then finding movement that's joyful and helpful. Because I've found with my clients as well that moving really helps to release a lot of the stress that we deal with on a daily basis, and we don't move, and we tend to kind of hold a lot of tension in our bodies. So that's a big part of my work. And I would say probably one of the best transformations that I saw was I was working with a high level leader from medical organization. I won't go too much into it, but she was dealing with burnout and overwhelm, and just she didn't have any time for herself. Her colleagues were not taking on their responsibilities. She wasn't delegating properly. She was doing all the household tasks at home. She was just completely exhausted, overwhelmed, staying up too late, watching too much TV, not taking care of herself. And in a matter of a couple months, I watched her completely transform that by delegating things at home and delegating things at work and really stepping into her own power. And she was able to get back an additional 10 hours a week for herself to take care of herself. She started going to Pilates regularly. She started to develop this community around her. She was setting boundaries at work and at home. And it was just really amazing to see her go through that whole transformation and to become empowered and not to just feel like the whole weight of the world was on her shoulders anymore, because it's so easy, I think, for us to try and mask in business as well and just appear like we have everything together when we're absolutely drowning. And so learning those strategies and skills to be able to kind of keep your head above water can make a huge difference for people.
I can think of so many people who might have been neurodivergent because I just saw the symptoms of it, right? But they might never have known they were, because that was not something that we talked about or I was even aware of. So how do you even find these women who do not even know that they could be neurodivergent? Not that they're doing it intentionally, but like lack of awareness, lack of knowledge. And that's one of the reasons we're doing the podcast, because somebody might listen and realize, hey, that's me. And there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, so how do you seek them? And do they have to be neurodivergent, or they just might be experiencing those symptoms to reach out to you?
No, they don't have to be neurodivergent. I always like to say I work with creative, intuitive servant leaders, because I think that there are a lot of people out there, even post-pandemic, even post-TikTok, who still don't know that they're neurodivergent or just deal with a lot of the symptoms and don't identify as neurodivergent. I personally think that all of the highly sensitive people are really secretly neurodivergent, but don't tell them because they don't want to be. I think that there's a lot more neurodiversity out there than people are willing to admit. And there's still so much stigma against neurodiversity. And I think that's part of why highly sensitive people exist as a group, is because they don't want to be identified with the stigma that is around neurodiversity. So how I connect with people mostly is LinkedIn. I do have a group on Facebook. I do a lot of social media advocacy and networking. And no, you don't have to have a diagnosis to work with me. You don't even have to think you're neurodivergent. You just have to know that you think differently and you're struggling with burnout and you're overwhelmed at work in your leadership role. And you want to learn some new skills and get some new tools to not have to feel like you're dealing with burnout all the time.
What are some of the kind of essential strategies that you will commonly utilize to not necessarily, maybe attack an issue that they're having, but explore kind of an individualized look at what would work for them?
Well, one of the top challenges that I see is imposter syndrome, particularly with women, and it's largely a women's issue. So that's something we tend to work on. We also work on, identifying what's draining them. Where is their energy going, and how can they kind of plug up those holes in the sieve so that they can recapture that energy? We go through kind of their productivity habits and try to unlearn any sort of toxic productivity habits, learn some new executive functioning strategies, because everyone's different on where they struggle in their executive functioning. So kind of figuring out where their strengths are and their weaknesses are, and then catering towards the strength, scaffolding the weaknesses. I'm really big on learning things like time blocking and, calendar management. And we definitely work on nervous system regulation. So I teach a lot of different grounding techniques. I have grounding techniques that are movement-based, sight, sound, touch. We can do a taste-based grounding technique. So it really caters to what your specific sensory needs are. And then again, addressing the sensory needs, because a lot of us, especially those of us who are late realized or might not even identify as neurodivergent yet, we have sensory needs that aren't being met. And so this can result in overeating, not sleeping enough because we're trying to meet those sensory needs, but we don't even realize it. So addressing the sensory needs, we work on, navigating relationships at work, dealing with difficult, toxic, dark tetrad personalities, because we all deal with those, especially in the executive leadership space. There are a lot of, I guess, strong personalities that can be very challenging to have to work with. So really learning how to set boundaries and protect yourself, how to keep yourself safe around those personality types is helpful. And then really just learning how to recapture joy, figuring out what lights you up, what really makes you happy, and then scheduling time to do that every day. Like actually putting it on your schedule. I have all of my clients put their exercise on their schedule, their meals are on their schedule, so that those things get done. Their time to capture joy is on their schedule. I had a client recently who she used to love jumping on a trampoline, and she just completely had stopped doing that. So she bought a little trampoline and she put it in her office and she started jumping on a trampoline again. And that was one of the things that she did to recapture joy. So it's really just, accommodating your needs, catering to what works for you, and then going back into your childhood and pulling out little things that made you really happy and incorporating those into your daily life.
When we fill ourselves with our joys and our passions, what makes us happy, that's what lifts everything up. That's the base that we need in order to tackle some of the more difficult things, like dealing with certain types of personalities, which are very detrimental to a neurodivergent person interacting with them, especially with our ways of taking on like extreme empathy. If we even see somebody else interacting with them, that can be very detrimental to us. And if we're not in a good space, there's only so much we can truly do for ourselves to support that. So we have to be able to make sure we get those joys in. And those tend to be the first things that honestly go whenever we have to start ditching things for, executive function reasons or overwhelm. It's the easy stuff that goes. We never really take care of ourselves in that regard. Talking about needing sensory preferences or sensory support needs, I was curious if you could speak on some of your own that you have come to sort of utilize and accept.
Yeah, so I'm a big texture person. I don't know if you noticed, but my shirt is crushed velvet, and I love like soft textures. One of my favorite things. So I love to wear crushed velvet. I love to wear like chenille. I love the way chenille feels, and it's a sensory thing for me. I like to touch it. It's calming for me. I find it soothing. Also, textures wise, I love crunchy food. Like somehow just crunching something is super satisfying. And so I'm trying to find, and it's an ongoing challenge, but finding a balance between, wanting to eat chips all the time and choosing vegetables instead, but just making sure that I'm catering to myself and taking time to eat the crunchy things and have soft textures around. I also am very sound sensitive, so I tend to wear AirPods a lot of the time. I have noise canceling earplugs as well, but I tend to just kind of lean on the AirPods. So that's something that I do for myself sensory wise. And then I've started incorporating more colors into my environment. I really like having certain colors around. I like having green. It's very soothing. It reminds me of nature, reminds me of being in the forest, which is grounding and makes me happy. I like pink, as you can see. I wear a lot of pink. My necklace is green, pink and green. Those are my colors. And, I've kind of started letting myself stim again. My favorite stim is playing with my hair. So I do it all the time. And that's a sensory need. It's, being able to touch my hair, the way that it feels, the way that my head feels when I kind of gently pull on my hair. And instead of overthinking it and worrying that people will think I'm ditzy or whatever, I just let myself be me.
So beautiful. It's those little pleasures.
Yeah. It is. It is. And I mean, I had a boyfriend 10 years ago and he used to just all the time tell me, don't play with your hair. You look like a ditz. And just looking back on that, it's all that time that I lost that I could have been playing with my hair and made more comfortable. Who cares?
Who cares?
Just cares.
Right. And that's why it's important not to impose our own likes and dislikes onto somebody else. We're also different as neurodivergent folks, because if playing with hair is annoying to somebody, we're always, I think, in this world imposing our beliefs onto somebody else. I'm mindful of that. And tell us about what can organizations do to support neurodivergence. See, so that, because we know they're amazing people, loyal and passionate. What can they do?
Yeah, there is actually a lot of research out there that indicates that employing neurodivergent people will bring in more money to your company. You're going to make more money. You're going to lose less money in profits. Neurodivergent people have a lot of amazing skills. We're really good at pattern recognition. We're really good at, identifying errors and focusing on small details. So some of the ways that you can accommodate neurodivergent people in your organization is having sort of an open door policy when it comes to leadership. So allowing them to, whether it's all the time or at scheduled times, have connection with all different levels of leaders, even if it's just to be able to speak with someone who isn't their direct supervisor, I think can be really empowering for a neurodivergent employee. Making the office space more accommodating. Open floor plans are really difficult and frustrating for neurodivergent employees. It's distracting. There's too much noise. It's just better to have sort of separated out workspaces, whether it's cubicles or private offices are ideal, but I understand that not everyone can do that. Allowing your employees to work remote, even part of the time, makes a huge difference. Productivity actually goes up when people work remote versus when people work in an office. And part of that with neurodivergent employees is they're not distracted the entire day and dealing with sensory overwhelm. Fluorescent lighting is another big challenge. Many of us find fluorescent lighting really overstimulating. So if you can maybe put in lamps in the office or allow your employees to turn off their fluorescent lighting and have lamps within their own offices can make a huge difference. Adding more greenery to the workspace is very calming and comforting for neurodivergent employees and also for all employees. And really, any of these accommodations or changes that you're making to your workspace or you're making for your employees are going to benefit everyone. They're not just going to benefit the neurodivergent employees. So that's the great thing about accommodating, is it really accommodates everyone. There's so many more, but I don't want to go on and on about it.
That's very helpful, because just adding art, for instance, as you're walking through the hallways, there's always something that you see in a piece of art, right? And it affects your mood. So yeah, just little things will make a big difference.
Absolutely. And then when you're remote, having subtitles on meetings and giving out meeting minutes before the meeting so that all of your employees know what's going to happen, what's going to be talked about, so that you're more prepared.
Yes, that's actually really huge about remote work. I don't think people talk about as far as accommodations go is the ability to do live captions. I think it's become a joke on the internet as like, why does everybody keep using like captions whenever they're watching things these days? But it's more about like for me, I need the visual to be able to properly digest the information. Like I need the both. Like sometimes when I will read an audiobook while reading the book at the exact same time is it keeps my brain from bouncing back and forth. And I do the autistic thing of the ADHD thing of having read like an entire chapter and then I realize I have no idea what I just read. So I have to go back and start again. And captions, like they keep me focused. And that's like, it's such a big help, especially when you have like a lot of sensory processing issues, or if you have delayed processing, like doing those, or now that's, since most meetings are done on Zoom, Zoom has the AI companion that will summarize things either after or while it's going. And that can be a big help. Like I think people look at it, those type of things, as like unnecessary add-ons instead of what they can be, which are accommodations for those who think differently and are deserving of a little bit of a step ladder to kind of like bring up the equity in the situation. And of course, I could go off about remote work in a lot of different ways right now, but I won't, to keep us focused. But going back to your advocacy, that is very important to you. What sort of message do you aim to convey about neurodiversity, both to the neurodivergent and to the world at large?
I think the biggest take-home message is that neurodivergence is a spectrum. There are people that show up in so many different ways, and we all need to learn a little bit more about neurodiversity and be a little bit more accepting I would really love it if in my lifetime the stigma can be destroyed, and if not destroyed, taken down by 50%. It's so frustrating to work up the courage to tell someone that you are autistic or that you're neurodivergent and have them say, "Oh, I don't see you that way," or "You don't seem autistic to me," or any other invalidating phrase, or, just shut you down like that diagnosis is wrong because of the stigma. So that's part of my work, is really educating others that there are people out there who are high masking, who appear neurotypical until we do something funky, and then you're just gonna think we're weird. It's really a spectrum. Everybody's different. Everyone has different skills, different capacities, and we all have an amazing message that needs to be shared and needs to be heard. And that's why I do the work that I do. And I really hope to bring more education and awareness around especially female neurodiversity and late realized neurodiversity, because, yeah, there's a lot of us out here that are walking around with all the neurotypicals and you would never know, or would you, So,
Yeah, late realized is so. Ooh, I think it's only starting to like build traction now, honestly, of people starting to like accept it because it's happening more often, just proliferation of information. And people look down on self-diagnosed, even the phrase of it. That's why I like, self-identified, self-realized, blah, blah, blah. Takes a little bit of the clinical off of it. Part of the reason why it needs to be accepted is to the professional community. If you are over the age of 18, you're not neurodivergent. I mean, that's the way it usually goes. And that leaves us with very little options other than self-identified most of the time. And I think there's a misunderstanding that many of us want to self-identify for some sort of, I can't even begin to explain the thought process for people who feel like there are people who self-identify as autistic or ADHD for some sort of selfish identity reason, which is puzzling to me. That says so much about the people who are saying that, especially when we're not, so much of what we ask for are not accommodations. I would even call them in traditional sense. I mean, yes, they're accommodations, but they're only accommodations because these systems are set up in a way that excludes people like us, people who process things differently, who have different sensory needs, who just have brains that operate on a different sub-level than others. That's why you don't even really like the term neurotypical. I prefer saying holistic most of the time, because typical makes it sound like, well, that's the typical norm, when really we both are equally human on the same exact level, in the same basis. Like, you just kind of got lucky that somewhere along the way you got to set up all of the systems and then sort of pushed us aside. Not to be like, I mean, it sounds hyperbolic, but it's really not. That's really how it truly worked. And then if you go back in time, a lot of those systems were built on the backs of neurodivergents who then either did not get credits or were utilized for, design purposes or think piece purposes that brought about the systems that were then altered to make room for holistics to sort of, I always joke, like, why do we get up so early? Like, why does the day start at like 5 a.m.? Why did we listen to the people, like the morning people who decided to do that like hundreds of years ago, that decide like the day starts at 5 a.m. and ends at nighttime? Like, if it were up to me, we would roll out of bed around noon and then everything would go from there. It would be fine. And ironically, that is also a neurodivergent thing, which is a lot of times our brains will more or less come alive, our nervous system, the opposite of an holistic, where they will start in the morning. They'll be able to pop up. Ours, our rhythms are a little bit different, where we'll suddenly get an energy boost after sundown, later in the day. Growing up, people thought I was lazy because I would sleep for like most of the morning, and then I'd be up until like 3 o'clock in the morning. People thought like I was weird. It's like, no, I like to write. That's when I could write. Like, I couldn't get up early and start writing first thing in the morning. I could, I would start writing, at 10 p.m. or something like that. And it's so important to remember, like, we're not this little minority. Like, the reason that there are quote unquote more diagnoses going on or more identification going on is information, and information coming from neurodivergent people. So often beforehand, it was, what was in the DSM-5. If you believe a DSM criteria for a lot of this stuff, pretty much if you're not a boy who likes trains, you're not autistic. And then and that's why I spent like 5 years after I first was like told like you might be autistic. No, because I looked at like the baseline for it and went like, well, that's clearly not me. It's not till you start actually talking to other people and you start to realize like, oh, that's like 0.1% of the autistic population is remotely close to this weird pop culture idea of what autism is. Same thing with ADHD. I was told, I thought I had ADHD actually when I was a teenager, but I was told like, well, you're not hyperactive, which, as we now know, has very little to do with ADHD. There's multiple layers to ADHD, and we have to be able to view that like large spectrum, and a spectrum that is not different from everybody else in such a like large gap of a way that we're somehow lesser because we're not holistic. We are behind that we need necessarily like help to get to the same level. It's like, no, all these other things are barriers for flat ground is what's going on. And we just need to get back to flat ground. And here's hoping we do. I don't know about right now, but here's hoping we'll get there eventually. As far as people who have been later in life recently diagnosed or have self-identified, what advice would you want to like impart to them?
I think finding your neurotribe is the biggest thing. Finding other people who you relate to, stepping away from those stigmas, like you were saying, about what people think autism is or what people think ADHD is, and really kind of connecting with other people on social media and finding people who have a similar life experience. Because when you can find people who are similar to you, it really makes you feel a sense of belonging. It's validating for your experience. And I think it's something that we all need. We all need to find other people who have similarities to us and have those connections and get support from them, which is why I'm such a huge advocate of coaching, and even therapy at times can be incredibly helpful as long as it's validating for a neurotype. I think it's really important to feel that sense of belonging and to see that there are other people out there that have had similar life experiences and have similar processing and reasoning. And, there's other people with a really strong sense of justice who believe that right is right and wrong is wrong. We don't have to always, be told that, oh, the world is gray. Maybe it's not for all of us. Maybe it's okay that we have this amazing sense of justice and that we see really fine details that other people miss. Maybe it's a gift. And as you were saying earlier, I think it's really important that we continue to speak out about neurodiversity being a normal, naturally occurring part of the human genetic code. It's been around since the dawn of time. This is not anything new. There is not an epidemic of autism in the United States. There's not an epidemic of neurodiversity that's happening. More people are getting diagnosed. More people are self-identifying. More people are starting to acknowledge that they struggle with similar things. And they're starting to want to accommodate their own needs and seek support and speak out about it. And that is amazing and wonderful. And it's important that we do that and that we continue to fall back on the science and not on stigma and not on, the disease model or the disability model, but on the real science of what neurodiversity is, a naturally occurring part of the humanity.
So perfectly said. That was beautiful. Thank you. Where can everybody contact you more and look at your coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a website. My website is ND Coach Inc., like Neurodivergent Coach Incorporated, ndcoachinc.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I have a Facebook group, and I'm on TikTok. My primary place to be found is on LinkedIn, and you can check out my website, or you can email me at ndcoachinc@gmail.com. And yeah, I'd love to connect. I'd love to know more about you.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your journey and all your experiences. It's going to help people. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Yes, thank you for joining us. It's been lovely talking with you, and I'll be sure to put all of your information in the show notes. Of course, for Spark Launch, it can always be found at sparklaunchpodcast.com, and for our ADHD learning solutions, sparklaunch.org. For now, we'll see you next time.